we wanted to bring to the airwaves, if I may, on Piscopo in the Morning, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, founder and president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. Dr. Jasser, welcome to the program, sir.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to have you on because, we get, please, I don't have to tell you, Doc, you paint the broad stroke of, Muslims are going to cause problems, Islamic fundamentalists, and we don't know where to go. But we are a loving people as Americans, but we do have a problem with all the terror, and a lot of the terrorists are Muslims. But that's why I like to bring Muslims onto the show to explain exactly what they're feeling, because I hate that quote-unquote racist overtone. Do you know what I'm saying, Doc? So it's nice but how do you explain to people, look, I'm a Muslim, look, I'm a peace-loving person, and I don't agree what's going on in the Middle East? I mean, how do you explain that to people, sir?
Well, I tell them, there's nothing more American than the struggle that Muslims are going through, not only domestically, but really globally, and that America was founded by patriots that believed in God, that were devout, but yet rejected theocracy. So in some ways, the greatest enemies of the founding of America were theocrats that were Christian, and Christianity had been going through its enlightenment and the separation of church and state. And right now, as far as Muslims and Islam is concerned, our greatest allies are Muslims that are fighting against the theocrats of the Khomeinists in Iran, the Saudi Wahhabis that are spreading their poison with the billions of petrodollars, the Muslim Brotherhood of Egypt. And yet, our greatest allies within those countries are the reformists, the revolutionaries, the millions that went to the street to reject the Brotherhood. So in the American Muslim community, you've got that same struggle. You've got some Muslims, especially in our leadership, I think, that are not only asleep, but really apologists, don't want to see, don't feel Islam has any problems or needs any reform, or those of us that are trying to get a voice that believe in the American experiment and say, you know what, terrorism is a symptom, and it's a bigger problem within that needs to separate mosque and state, and we want to take on this challenge and get a voice.
You know what we always say, too? We're talking with Dr. Zuhdi Jasser of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. Whenever there's a terrorist act, and we always say, why don't the Muslims speak against this? Do you get the press time that you need, if I may ask, when something terrible happens, when ISIS does something? And are you at home saying, I would like to answer that, but do you feel a prejudice that you don't get to say what you want to say, Doctor?
We've been getting more and more, but the problem is it sort of spikes right after an attack, and then nobody's connecting the dots and saying, maybe America needs a strategy where we're persistently addressing this threat. The reason there's ISIS in all 50 states is we're not addressing the bigger, deeper problem. We have a strategy called against violent extremism, which is really still a symptom, and not a strategy against violent Islamism in order to engage Muslims. I mean, you have to call it Islamic if you're going to engage Muslims. Otherwise, you're going to just dismiss it and say Islam's a religion of peace. And yet, if you don't thread that needle and say that the solution's within Islam and Muslims are American patriots, you're going to actually overshoot and alienate the people you need. So I wish it wasn't sort of the ADD approach to radical Islam, and rather more of a persistent approach to say, the greatest threat, Joe, in the 21st century is radical Islam and political Islam, more so than the violence, which is a symptom, but the theocratic ideology that's filling vacuums in the Middle East and also in America, where we have an experiment, an ability to confront theocracy, and yet we're not really engaging Muslims in this conversation.
Yeah, and how do we deal with them? How do you deal with ISIS? I always say, and God forgive me, I mean, I'm a God-fearing guy, Doc, but I mean, I said on the air, frankly, it's extermination. It's like, even as an Italian-American, you had the bad Italians in the mafia, you had Mussolini, and the only way to get rid of these people is extermination. I mean, do you believe in that drastic military-type approach?
As far as ISIS, absolutely, and that they are a military target and need to be decimated. But remember, you get rid of ISIS, you got Hamas, you got Hezbollah, you got all these other. It's like the heads of a hydra. So where does it come from? The boot camp for ISIS is the Saudi Wahhabi ideology, and you wouldn't have ISIS today had we helped the moderate secular rebels in Syria fill that vacuum and get rid of Assad. So you can't get rid of ISIS without getting rid of the equal evil on the opposite side, which is the so-called secularism of Assad's fascism, who's working with Iran closely, who's working with Hezbollah. So, you've got a triangle of evil in the Middle East, Joe. One point of it is Sunni Islamism from the Wahhabis or the Muslim Brotherhood. The other point is Shia Islamism of Hezbollah or Iran. And that third point of the triangle is secular fascism of the Assads, the Saddam Husseins of history, and the kings and the monarchs that claim to be our allies, but yet are fueling and destroying their societies through radical ideology that they use sort of in a Machiavellian sense.
And I was in Detroit, and then I went to Ohio, and big Muslim communities out there, Doc, right? And a lot of folks in the show that I was at about a week ago in Toledo were Muslims, and I could see, and they came in and they came over and they introduced, and I remember thinking, God, these are good family folks here. Then I meet a Syrian guy last week, Syrian American, and he heard me say, you got to stop ISIS and don't let the Syrians in because we're scared. We don't know, Doc. We don't know what to do. It's scary. Now they're bringing 100,000 Syrians in, but then when I talk one-on-one to a Syrian American who was a hardworking guy, it's all ISIS and all these terrorists that are making it so tough for us to be humanitarian. The red flags are up. How do you get through this minefield, Doc?
Well, God bless them all. My family's dodging bombs in Damascus, and we're miles away from chemical attacks and perpetrated by the Assad regime. And bottom line, and nobody can guarantee we're not going to get some ISIS person that tries to come in with the millions of refugees. But we can't change the narrative of what America is. Every war from World War II to the Vietnam War, we opened our doors, we vetted the people that came in. If you look, yes, there have been a few refugees that have ended up trying to attack us, but the vast, vast majority of attacks are homegrown, often second generation. So the refugees are the ones that love America and love the West. So the bigger picture is if you have a Muslim consciousness that's going through modernization and through reform, America has to be that city on the hill. That Statue of Liberty has to mean something, or else, they're going to see it not different from Russia or Saudi Arabia or Iran. So ultimately, yes, we need to vet them. We need to separate between the jihadists and those who want to be free and just individual rights-based humanitarian type aid. But we have to be smart about it. But we can't say, we're not going to take any in, because A, it's not really what America does, and B, some of the greatest contributors to America's security have been those seeking freedom from every ethnic community in our history.
Dr. Zuhdi Jasser with Piscopo on the radio. Before we let you go, Doc, I could talk to you for hours about this. Would you be so kind to tell us what you thought about Ben Carson's comments about not supporting a Muslim president?
Well, I sort of got whiplash from what's happening. The last 6.5 years, we've had a president that won't even identify what's going on. And now we went overshot where he conflated Islamists, which is what he meant to say, and later he did amend and correct his remarks and say he meant those Muslims who believe in theocracy, etc., which is right. But when you just say Muslims, listen, A, it's not consistent with the Constitution, and B, our solution to this are Muslims who believe in the Constitution above any Sharia law, etc. So, yes, we need to make that qualification because, by the way, Joe, it's not just about the presidency. Any security clearance in government for our officers in the military, Homeland Security, we need to know they're not going to side, ideologically with jihadists, etc., and there needs to be a vetting of that. But we can't overshoot and say, well, a Muslim can't be president. The reformers like our forum, like the coalitions of feminists and others that we work with that are trying to push back against political Islam are those that reject Sharia in government and are loyal patriots. And we have to be careful to thread the needle and not conflate Islamists with all Muslims.
Wow, what a great conversation, Doc. Thank you so much. Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, right there, founder and president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. Please come back, Doc. Would you be so kind to do that?
Oh, anytime, Joe. I think the world of you. Thank you so much. God bless.
Thank you. You too as well. 7:39 with Joe Piscopo right now.